Hey guys, John from Western Maine Defensive Tactics. Today we're going to take a look at the Windlass Steelcraft's Ames 1860 Naval Cutlass reproduction. And specifically the Windlass, because there's a couple of versions of this floating around if you shop around on the internet, particularly eBay, that are similar in profile but not as well executed, not as good a quality. I handled a couple in shops in Gettysburg that were just the usual tourist junk, but the hilts look the same, the blades are a little different, and just buyer beware on that. So I got this from Windlass, from Atlanta Cutlery / Museum Replicas. Back in February, they had some kind of a deal going on, I think for Valentine's Day, because of course for Valentine's Day you buy each other's swords. That's what you do. I got this for $217, which not a bad price for what it is overall, considering the quality of what you get. You're going to hear the word pretty a lot in this. Not that the thing is pretty. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good quality, and it's pretty well done overall. So this is a fairly accurate, reasonably priced, decent quality reproduction of the Ames 1860 or 1861 Cutlass. Overall length, let's say 26-inch blade, 31 3/4 inch overall. Some of the originals run 32. There's always some variance there. Weighs 31.78 ounces, which equates to about 1.99 pounds. So basically 2 pounds. The grip, bowl, and hilt are all pretty well done. I'll give you a closer look at these. The weight of the brass is close to an original, based on comparing the thickness of this guard to the thickness of the guard from the Relic Cutlass. The butt cap is pretty close in profile, though not quite as large in diameter. You still have peen construction. I guess if you're picky, this has 11 rivets and the originals have 10, but there's a good difference that allows it to make it a little bit more difficult to fake. Bowl is pretty substantial, though I don't have an original bowl to compare it to as far as thickness. Grip is hardwood, grooved, wrapped with black leather or pleather, whichever you want to call it, wrapped with brass wire. I'll point out that a lot of your originals are going to be missing the wire because they were removed on board ship or before issue, and the hilts are covered with tar. There's a particular name for that process, but it just escapes me right now. I'm sorry. Concerns? Well, on this bowl, there's a bit of a point right here. I can file that down or pound it back down in there. That's not that big a deal. Watch for your maybe the tops of your rivets having a burr or something that'll tear your hand up. Other than that, it's pretty good to go. My other kind of concern, not a huge concern, but we'll see if it's an issue if it crops up, the tang width. The next thing we're going to get into is the blade stock. The blade stock is thinner in comparison to an original. It sounds like it's a problem, but it's kind of not. But we'll get into that in a second. But with steel this thin or thinner than original, I would make that tang as wide as I could, just for additional insurance. But with the steel they typically use, which is a 1060, 1080, and the decent spring or soft spring heat treatment they give, it's probably going to hold up reasonably well. So moving on to the blade. So I've talked about the blade. The blade is 0.178 inches thick. That is about half the thickness of the original, which runs about 5/16 or 0.32 plus or minus. However, it doesn't have a distal taper. It doesn't have much of a distal taper. It doesn't start to taper much until you get to the end of the fuller here. And it only tapers a couple of thousandths of an inch, which means it retains a lot of that mass all the way out, which that equates to it feels pretty good in the hand. It doesn't feel like an original. You can feel a little bit more weight out there in the tip, which is fine. The advantage this gives you is, though this sample is sharpened from Windlass, it's not razor sharp. However, it does have a lot of steel along the edge, which means it gives you, the end user, the option of reprofiling this edge into a really good, useful Appleseed or convex edge, like a lot of swords and axes had. Which, if this was ground thin to be like show sharp, like, oh wow, my sword cuts paper, and all that, shaves hair really easily, and can split hairs, that's all fine and dandy, but when it comes down to doing things that cutlasses do, cutting open skulls and cutting off limbs and hacking up brush and being used as a tool and used to cut rigging and all that kind of stuff, it's probably not going to survive it. Granted, we're not doing a lot of high sea battles these days, but the purpose I see this being very useful for, despite the thinness of the blade, is this is going to make a really, really cool machete slash bush sword slash hunting sword. It'll allow you to train with a cutlass that is useful on the pell, out in the woods, doing drills, whatever you'd like to do, and actually be able to cut things with it for a reasonable amount of money. Now, would I like to have this same reproduction cutlass with a full profile blade? Oh, you bet your ass I would. I would pay twice as much for it, because if you spend, let's say it's $450, you go out and try to find a reproduction, or let's say an original Ames cutlass for $450, you're going to get one in worse shape than this. You're going to get one that is almost completely rusted. You're going to get one that has had the hilt flattened right out. It's going to be nasty, and you're going to have to do a lot of work on it, potentially ruining some history. Maybe not, depends on how you look at it, before you can do anything with it. However, if they made a full profile blade, for $450, I mention that because you see a lot of stuff coming out of Windlass that is full profile as far as cavalry sabers and things for about that price point. So they could do a shorter blade, a little thicker, a little wider for about the same price, I'm thinking. And if I was them, I would keep both of these options in their line, because I would want at least one of each, if not two of each. But anyway, that doesn't exist right now, so we have to talk about what we actually have. So this, when sharpened, well sharpened, and I would sharpen, at least a portion of the back edge as well, make a really nice trainer slash cutter slash bush sword. It would allow you to extend your Bowie knife repertoire into the cutlass pretty inexpensively, while still having a useful tool and a really cool machete, yard hacker in the process. So don't let the apparent skimpiness of the stock get you down, because that's not unprecedented in cutlass history. The 1917 U.S. Naval Cutlass, as well as the Dutch Kluang, I believe it's pronounced, sword, had 1/8 inch thick blades, which is .125, which is thinner than this by a little bit, a couple of thousandths of an inch. And they say they never issued the 1917 Cutlass, but the Dutch issued the Kluang quite a bit. A lot of those are used in Southeast Asia. Some of them were captured by the Japanese, and the bowls were cut off, guards cut down. They were used as jungle hackers and to open coconuts and stuff like that. And a lot of those have survived. So it's not completely useless. It's an actually really good tool. And if you want to make an argument against that, well, machetes are even thinner than this. And they have basically they have good steel, generally, and good heat treatment, and they survive real well. And this is an old Collins. I mean, how long has it been since you've seen a paper stamp on a machete blade? Some of you have probably never seen one. But nobody's going to argue with the effectiveness of a machete as a tool and a weapon. They've got a couple hundred years of actual proof and use and defense and frankly genocides to prove it or disprove that. Machetes are extremely useful tools and weapons. But this is going to be a really neat yard cutter, machete, trainer, whatever you'd like to do with it. Another aspect I'd like to mention is, what if you live in a jurisdiction, maybe outside of the United States, where you can't get guns? Would this be a nice thing to have for home defense? I think it would be. A 26-inch blade might be a hair long in some places, but I would leave it 26, and if I needed to, cut it off, maybe cut 4 inches off it. But I would be loath to do that, because this is a pretty compact design. It's got good feel in the hand for what it is. And I've got a full-size cavalry saber that is kind of a pain to swing around the living room. But this thing, I can do all my drills right in the living room in a fairly cramped area. And it's nice. In a hallway, in a kitchen, in a bathroom, something like that, you'd be well served by it. And of course, we're talking about facing other armed people that are breaking into your house trying to kill you with a blade. If you do it with proper aggression, proper initiative, you'll probably do pretty well. I mean, that's what aggression and initiative and just ferociousness with edged weapons is what kept the bayonet, or keeps the bayonet on the battlefield for generations, hundreds of years. Anyway, not to get into that too far, but another thing that makes this really, really useful is the sheath. And let's set this aside, and I'll show you the sheath real quick. The sheath comes, granted, now this isn't an original design or original pattern sheath, and all the Ames cutlasses did come with sheaths. It was part of the contract. It's just that the Navy tended to not use the sheath, so they either sat on ship or in a warehouse and were lost or rotted or thrown away or whatever. So there are some people that will say, well, the original cutlasses never came with sheath, that's why my cutlass doesn't have a sheath. Now, it's pretty common for them not to have a sheath because these are kept as every man's weapon. You got to remember that about a cutlass. That's why you don't find, or you often see, what is the British cutlass. They call it the figure 8. That is just a rough iron grip with a rough iron bowl, and a lot of times the blades have, seen better days. This is every man's sword. This is the one you give, your yeoman sailor to do a boarding or repel boarders with. But anyway, let's get back into the sheath. Most inexpensive knives and swords come with sheaths that are complete shit. This is actually pretty good. The leather is pretty substantial, good and stiff, has a lot of body to it, reasonably thick throat and shape, not overly thin, not overly thick, so it's not heavy, but it's not too light where it's going to crush easily. Frog stud. Frog, you'd keep this on your belt. When you wanted to use your cutlass, you'd slide the sheath in just like this. It would lock in just like that, and you're off to the races. And then you want to get back in your pickup truck or on your yacht or anything like that, take it right out. Leave this on your belt. When you want to throw that cutlass back on, and it goes. Very, very useful. Again, not the original pattern. The original pattern had no brass on it, but the frog stud, and it had 43 rivets on the backside, with the last rivet going through the tip of the sheath. But anyway, this is a really good buy for the price. And $100 just isn't as much money as it used to be, guys. So this is a good purchase. And if you like swords, and even if you don't like swords, if you like Bowie knives, pick one of these up. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised and learn some things about Bowie knives from learning to use a cutlass. It's a little bit different, but it's kind of the same too. You'll also appreciate the aspects of the cutlass that can be used as a tool as well as a weapon, as well as all this nice hand protection. So anyway, that's about all I have on that, but I think you should give it a try. I really like this. It's for what it is and for the price I paid, I've got zero complaints. And I'm going to sharpen this thing up and go do some hacking in the woods with it, use it as a hunting sword, and you'll probably see this again. Maybe we'll do a little testing. In fact, I'd like to have, if I can raise, the extra funds for something to, beat up, I'll get another one and do a real good job of sharpening it, and then maybe we'll take it out in the woods and abuse it and see what it can actually take, just so we know. But all right, guys, hope you enjoyed it. Go buy yourself a cutlass because they're awesome. See ya.